Nahmaduhu nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Very honored to be here. Let me start right away. Quickly introduce my panelists. On my right is Mr. Afaq Khan, Chairman of Al Rajhi Bank Malaysia, and Mr. Rafi Hanif, CEO of CIMB Islamic Malaysia. On my left is Khalid Saad, CEO of Fintech Bay Bahrain, and with him Oliver Rajik, CEO and founder of Alpha Fintech of Singapore. We'll start right away, right? So the banking industry overall is entering an era of hypergrowth. In the next 3 to 5 years, we expect 2 to 3 billion people to get connected to internet, and 80% of this population is from OIC markets, so emerging Islamic finance markets, right? Many of these people will be first-time banking, right? And a bank is still a relatively new phenomena for them, right? The question here is the Islamic banking industry ready to capitalize on this potential of winning the next billion consumers? Are we ready for this hyper growth era that is fueled by A, exponential technologies, B is new fresh business models, right? And if you see around, right, I mean, the infrastructure required to cater to this banking market, to the finance market going forward, has a number of unique components to it that we were not used to in the past. Things like digital identity, things like API aggregation, things like blockchain ecosystem, things like open banking and the data issues that come with it. So we are going to have two major themes discussed in the next half an hour or so before we open the floor to questions as well. And the first question is going to be about how ready is the Islamic finance industry for the fintech era, right? That's number one. And number two is, okay, so we are talking about a collaborative ecosystem going forward. What is working out well and what is not working out? And my panelists will give their perspective. So let me start with Afaq Khan on my right. Again, going back to the question, how ready is Islamic finance market to capitalize on this era of hypergrowth?
So we have to think about this as a threat and as an opportunity. If you look at it as a threat, I think the industry overall is making efforts. They're engaging. Almost every Islamic bank has a digital strategy. But the problem with banking system and the banking industry in my mind is we are slow to change. We are control-driven organizations. We are stuck in our approval models on payback periods and so on and so forth. So we are missing half the opportunity to really take advantage and rejig a business model completely to be relevant for the customers of 2025, 2030. I am interested in how we are going to compete with non-traditional comparative players like e-wallets, like big data companies, which are trying to come into our space. I'm equally interested, how are we going to attract the next generation of young customers who want to interact with the financial system in a fundamentally different way? They do not want to come to a branch. How do you create loyalty? How do you create lifetime loyalty, right? So those are the things that I think Islamic banking boards, Islamic banking senior management has to think. Islamic banking will continue to grow. There's a great opportunity. This fintech is a great equalizer for people who have investment and people who don't have investment, right? To take advantage of this change, this information technology, that ecosystem which is developing. But I sense that we are still looking at it as put on the mobile and cut transaction time. And we have to think of it fundamentally differently. How will banking look 15 years from today? What will be my client? How will I have an emotional connectivity with him? And then work back on what is the journey forward. So it's a glass half full.
So, right? So Afaq bhai, what I hear, and it's refreshing, but it's also stunning. You represent one of the largest Islamic banks in the world, right? So is this awareness there at banks, at the board level, that we may be losing out? We are not ready for the hyper-growth era.
So this is what we are debating at various forums. Of course, we want to get onto blockchain. Of course, want to get onto digitization and so on and so forth. But we want to also step back and say, how will we be banking in 2030? Right? What will my customer want? Why will he choose me? He can click anything on a keypad, right? Why me? And we're trying to create a conversation, right, towards that, and then hopefully it will build to a strategy.
So do I hear correctly that the position you're taking is Islamic banking industry is today not ready for this hyper-growth era that is facing us?
I think, as always, we are going after the low-lying fruit, cut cost, reduce time to market, right? Let some people go, reduce transaction time, but a bigger conversation needs to happen.
Right. Rafe, just continuing from there, right? So you need certain infrastructure to actually capitalize on this next billion consumer if you want to, right? Digital identity at a national level, right? Open banking system, right? Other stuff like blockchain ecosystems. Are you seeing? What is working out well for the Islamic banks today, or is it a completely lost cause?
I think it's a mixture of both. If you look at banks in more sophisticated markets, if you look at Malaysia, for example, is highly competitive, margin is compressing, cost is going up, and customer expectation is growing every year.
Right.
And you find that CX is the focus of almost all the banks, and the customer demand is growing exponentially.
Right.
So the customer wants cheaper, better, faster solutions from the convenience of his home. So he wants to open an account online at 2 o'clock in the morning. And in Malaysia, we have a lot of these restaurants open 24 hours. They could be watching Liverpool versus Manchester and trying to open an account as well. So in Malaysia, it's still not possible. Although we have a national ID card, which has all the features, introduced 15 years ago, still we cannot.
15 years ago.
What do you have today? Your Emirates
so you
ID.
have that chip, and
that chip. It also has a mobile wallet, which currently we are using for car parks and for Salik equivalent. But it's still not allowing us to open online.
Really?
Because the KYC is still controlled through central regulatory system. In Singapore, we have launched Islamic Fast Saver account, where you can open any time. So all you need to do is fill up the online form, scan your ID, scan your proof of address, for example, your bill, utility bill, and within a few seconds, you get an account open. And you can then transfer money from any other bank to your account. But you can't withdraw until you get a security tag.
So what you're saying is Singapore has a national eKYC
utility
that allows you end-to-end online transaction and
CIMB was the first to introduce the Islamic Fast Saver account.
What about the OIC markets? What is holding us back? I know it's not there in the GCC. I know it's not there in many Asian markets. What is holding us back?
So
it's a no-brainer.
Just Malaysia. We have had all the system. It's just that the mindset that this ID is something personal. But the problem is, if you go to Malaysia, you go to any offices, you have to give your ID as proof.
Right.
So it's no longer secure. Everyone has got your ID number, your account, your even not account, but your home address. So, but the mindset is we don't want to share it with banks. So that's where I think we need to change.
So 15 years ago, you said the ID card is there with that chip, so all the data is there. Plus, it can be used as a payment card as well as a wallet as well.
That's right.
15 years. How many people have heard about that? That in Malaysia, you have this facility. Yeah. Very few. What went wrong?
It was always seen as a national ID card, because everyone was using cash. Even today with mobile wallets, CIMB has launched a mobile wallet. Maybank has got a mobile wallet, but the usage of mobile wallet is not even 2%.
So
people they're very comfortable with
trying to drive or build that momentum, or not really, or is it like to each their own?
So if you look at China, why this wallet picked up? Number one, they had constraints on ATMs. There were not that many ATMs and branches available, so that mobile wallet came in quite handy. In India, it picked up because of demonetization. Right. In Malaysia, there are ATMs everywhere, and people are very comfortable with cash. Right. Although we have given them mobile wallets, converting them from cash to mobile wallet has not been successful.
So what's your vote? Is the Islamic finance industry ready for this hyper-growth era?
Depending on the demand, yes, we are ready. This is one example I've given, that online KYC. But there are many examples on the digital front Last year and this year, we have seen a growth. Almost 90% of new assets being booked is through digital. Online, we have 1 minute approval for home financing, selective 60 housing projects so far, and 12 dealers where you can get 1 minute car approval, car financing approval.
Okay, so at Malaysia level, yes. At the OIC level, or who's championing the Islamic finance market overall? So at the moment, I think we've got a gap there.
I think Dubai is clearly, and Bahrain. I think these are two leading economies where we're going to see a lot of disruptive technologies. But Malaysia, it's simply a cost factor. We cannot run away. Our cost-income ratio is 50%. So unless we can control the cost of operation, we will not be profitable.
So interesting. So your vote is, yes, we are ready for this hyper-growth era. The industry is ready. Khalid, same question to you.
I think the gentleman mentioned a very valid point, and I think the biggest hurdle is just the ethos. And I always think, people trying to figure out what fintech is, and I always say it's a mindset. You can always find people that will demystify the technology, but are you bought into this whole idea, the culture? I think for a long time, and if I just look at Bahrain and the region, and it's not just inherent to us, but also I think globally, the regulatory barriers protected the existing incumbents. And I think the customer has been completely ignored. And obviously, while there is ample liquidity, everybody looks good. I think there are two things that are happening that are fundamentally shifting the way things are happening. One is regulators are now dropping down the barriers. So you've got a new breed of players that are coming into the market. And I think concepts like the regulatory sandbox, which was pioneered with the FCA and now rolled out in other markets. I'll use the example of Bahrain. We launched this like a year and a bit ago. There are 16 companies looking at crypto assets, some challenger banks, robo-advisory. These are new players that now have a reason to enter the market. They understand the customer better. And,
Are you happy with the pace at which we are progressing?
Look, I think if you ask me, I would like things to always go faster. But I think if I compare where we were, let's say, a year ago, we were here, and now we're here. And I think at a regulatory level also, in general, regulators are conservative by nature. But now they've literally have been driving things much more aggressively. And if I look at our part of the world, it's usually governments and regulators that are extremely much more aggressive than, let's say, the private sector, where maybe in more Western markets, the private sector has been driving the regulation. So I think regulatory barriers are dropping down. And at the same...
Is it fast enough? So yes, we are improving, but are we geared up? Again, I'll keep coming back to this hard question. Are we geared up to capture the next billion consumer at the pace which... Rafi mentioned digital identity at national level. What is stopping Bahrain from really getting started?
Look, I think it was one... regulation, and I think we've had the national ID card for well over 10 years. Again, it won't boil down to the point of, do different agencies want to share that data? And I think the answer was no for a very long time. So, I use my ID just to prove who I am, go into the airport, like smart gate here and get out. That's it. Has the function of, having your medical records, your bank account, etc. Now, I think what's happening with the country in terms of a cloud-first policy, government is literally moving all of its infrastructure to the cloud, first country in the region to do so. Agencies do not have an excuse anymore now to say, we don't want to give you your data. It's all moving to the cloud. That's going to open up a whole different ecosystem. I think the other thing which is now changing things is the customer is now the center of attention. We're starting to see it in Europe. Open banking, this is something that's coming to Bahrain. UK is pushing open banking, PSD2. That will change the playing field. And I think also with big tech globally creeping in.
So PSD2 in Bahrain?
Open banking is hopefully going to be
awesome. So that's
rolled out. And I think that's the pace. I always think, and I'll use the governor in his own words. Anything that's happening globally, there shouldn't be any impediments to happen in the local market. And I think Bahrain is a small market, and we're a very small piece in this whole Islamic banking world, or the OIC. And I think a lot more can be done, and it's going to take significantly more than Bahrain, Malaysia.
So what's your vote? Are we ready are we geared up for the hyper growth era? Yes, no.
Partially, I think some
there's no partially, dude. So yes,
well,
no.
Probably not yet.
Not yet.
Not
Okay.
yet.
Okay, so we've got 2 no's, 1 yes. Oliver, you've flown all the way over from Singapore. You run a company that was a spin-off of Wells Fargo. You've done phenomenally well by creating a middleware with about 200 fintech vendors on it. API aggregation, right, is what you do in simple terms. You've also been looking at GCC and some Asian market, the Islamic finance market. Do you feel the Islamic finance industry is ready for this hypergrowth?
Shockingly not ready. On the complete opposite spectrum. Let me give you a couple data points why I believe Islamic banks are going to be an even bigger surprise than regular banks. Regular banks under attack globally everywhere, and not from the traditional players, but from unexpected players, because technology is cheaper, because banking licenses are becoming available easier. If you look at the corporate sector, there is hardly any bank around the world that's not losing profit margin at money. Now consumers more as well. Now, why is the Islamic banking sector even under more attack? Simple. It's the youth. Fact is that Muslims around the world constitute the lowest median age. And the youth of today has got a bigger impact on business than any of them ever had. So what does the youth want? First off, to start with, none of the young generation trusts bank to begin with. So they would love to have alternative options. They will trust Instagram, Facebook more with all of their data than they will banks.
Right.
So you have a lack of trust. The second thing is if you have kids, you know they have absolutely no patience. Instant gratification must happen.
Yeah.
Not 15 documents, not waiting 6 weeks for account approval. And here's the third one, maybe the most important one, personalization. If you look at the cars, you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 series BMW. If you look at closing, people now want a 3D print closing so they can customize it.
Right.
So the simple question I have for this generation that's driving personalization, what solutions can you build so that the small to large medium retailer, the high risk to low risk, can customize their own solutions?
So what's the game changer that you are seeing in some of the Far East markets that you would love to see more in emerging markets or Islamic finance markets? Yeah.
It's a couple things. First off, to me, it's shocking that there are still even some banks who debate whether they should be on the cloud. You laugh because you know that's the truth. So that's how far behind they are. Second off, I think it was a cyber study that showed that 50% don't have even an API strategy. So they don't know whether they need the cloud, they don't know whether they need an API strategy, and they're still suffering from, I have to build the power plant and run it. Fact is, any of these markets, whether it's the Salesforce CRM markets, whether it's the Amazons of this world, it's about embracing new technologies and becoming an enabler. Nobody cares anymore that you're running the power plant. The fact is, what is the interface and the value add that you're creating that allows me speed and personalization? And if you're in a bank in Malaysia and you're running 50% OPEX, and you're not going to go to your CTO and say, hey, listen, that army of developers you have, I want to cut that by 10%. I just want you to maintain these software and technologies. Now there's an entire political battle coming in. And the biggest impact that all the banks are going to see, what's happening everywhere around the world, Europe, US, Australia, and even here, the moment the regulations loosen up and the moment other competitors can come in. Amazon is providing small business loans. I think AirAsia is already starting to provide small business loans. So competitors you never even saw coming to a target market that in Islamic banking is the youth, where there's an enormous gap.
Right. Interesting. So shockingly, no. The industry is not ready. Any last thoughts on
exactly the point I was making? What Oliver said. He said it much more articulately. The youth wants to interact with the financial system differently. Yeah. There's a trust deficit, right? They trust Facebook, right? They trust Amazon. They trust the e-wallet. Right. They trust the click, right? They don't trust the billboard anymore. Right? They don't care about the billboard. So we have to rejig our operating model. We have to think like them.
So clearly there is a broader general consensus that there's a lot more that can be done. We are not ready. But that's the easy part. The difficult part is, okay, so how do we get started? And one of the key pillars there is a collaborative ecosystem. When you talk about platform banking, when you talk about fintech ecosystem, you're talking about giving away a lot of control, traditional controls from banks, away to third parties. collaborative ecosystem, how well are we seeing it in the Islamic finance markets? There are two arguments to it. One is what banks are saying is fintechs are not really bank ready. That you come to us, some 20-year-olds, coming up with a new technology, come to us and say, okay, fine, let's get started. And we are here, the protector of the consumer trust, right? You guys have no clue in terms of what the governance looks like, what the structure looks like. You've been here for 1 year, 2 years. We don't know if you'll exist in a few years' time. And the fintechs are arguing the banks are, suffering from dementia. They are, the legacy system is simply, the legacy mindset is simply not, letting them move on. Let's have a conversation on this as well. From a bank's perspective, do you find, from a CIMB perspective, you've dealt with a lot of fintechs. In fact, you tried an experiment as well, and it didn't go well, you were sharing, right? Are fintechs ready to partner up with banks?
I think the fintechs are ready. My take is the banks may not be ready. Some banks...
Oh, so I thought it's the other way argument.
The other way
okay,
around, right. So if you look at it, banks like CIMB, given the size, we were able to invest in the platform. So we have an open API. We have Hadoop that can analyze the data. So we can actually use the data for predictive modeling. But if a bank doesn't have Hadoop, it doesn't have an open API, I mean, you can talk to as many fintechs, but you're not going to get any solution.
Right.
So because we have scale, we were able to invest. And then we find partners. So we are with Ripple, for example, for our FX solution. And we have developed a model. You talked about this, the millennials who want fast, bespoke, instant solutions. So we have developed AI technology, which we call FIRST, which is around financing, around investment, return, savings, and transaction. So we ask them 4 questions, basic questions, that will segment them into 7 different segments, and each segment has got a bespoke solution. This is only the first generation. Eventually, it will start learning. We are at the machine learning level. We are developing towards deep learning with AI. Eventually, it will be able to...
This is with fintech players in collaboration? Internal.
It's internal developed.
Okay, so my question
there's
is,
nothing
why are
stopping
you
from
not collaborating enough with fintechs?
It's just no one has come to us with that comprehensive solution.
With that, so what you're saying is the fintechs lack the scale?
No. It's just a matter of timing. I think when we started it is some years ago, so we have now launched it, but the platform is now available for someone to plug and play. So we went through the long journey of coming up with the whole works, but there's nothing stopping. I don't think banks should be worried about proprietary interest in the technology. You should be worried about the products and the quality of the service.
So I see a different mindset, but I don't see that collaboration. So Citibank has 25 collaborations today, 25 plus, right,
yes.
with startup fintech players. BBVA has enough, right? So why do Islamic finance market, banks in Islamic finance market, not have enough of those collaborations?
No, we are collaborating with SkyMind, for example, on AI solutions.
Okay.
So the idea is, in the past, we were in the hindsight stage.
Right.
We had the information, we knew how to describe. He has bought 2 products.
Right.
We've moved to insights. Then we know these kind of segments will need 3 products.
Right.
Now we are moving towards foresight,
Right.
which is what we call the predictive and prescriptive model.
Right.
We are now able to predict, if you had bought these 2 products, the likelihood of buying 2 more products is 80%.
So Rafi, do you have, as a bank, right?
Yeah.
As a bank, do you have a structured approach or a mechanism how you would engage with the fintech on board? Because the fact of the matter is, they will be startup. They don't have the
who are not bankers.
Yeah.
They dress differently. They operate differently. They're
Beyond
very
that,
different.
beyond the fact, beyond the looks and the visuals, have you found serious enough fintechs who can speak your language or conform to your governance and the various
I think
issues?
they have. I'm quite comfortable that fintechs understand how banking operates. Some banks are not ready, and it's principally because of size. Most Islamic banks don't have the size, therefore they cannot invest.
Some banks are not ready, or most banks are not ready?
Most banks are
Not ready.
I tell you, Rafi makes good points, right? CIMB may be an exception to the rule. It's always been an innovator in the market, so may not be a good sample for the market at large. The problem is you can have a fintech department. You can get them from telcos and so on. So when they write a paper, it goes through the committees, it ends up at the board, mindset has not changed.
Yep. Does not
And that is what is holding us back. Right? So we need to bring people on the board, right, who have 20 years of technology experience, out of Silicon Valley experience. I bring the banking experience. I need a colleague who can say, Afaq, don't worry. is
But
in
again,
safe
you
hands.
represent one of the larger banks, and you have worked with a lot of other banks as well. Help me understand, do Islamic banks have that mechanism how to engage with fintechs, right? Or is it more of arm twisting because, this guy is a startup, he will have to yield to my terms?
No, so there is truth, and maybe you guys will not like it. There is truth. Banking is a controlled, risk-averse, safety, trust of the customer deposit type of institution. Fact of the matter is, it is difficult to trust somebody with my open architecture who's 23 years old, chose not to finish university, right, and has some angel investor, and halfway through you sell it to somebody else because you have another great idea you want to work on, and I've now exposed the bank to significant systemic risk. So there is value in this. It can be boxed. Every risk can be boxed and managed. You just have to measure it and look at the risk reward and box it, right? So regulations can help. The central bank can help in this journey, because what is the bank most afraid of? Censure or penalty from the regulator, and then reputational risk, right? So they are the stakeholders who can help the banks bridge this gap. But the fact of the matter is, young people have 10 ideas a day, right? So you have to pick and choose who you're going to trust your 30-year-old client relationship data with. And that's a reality.
It doesn't make it easier when the fintech guys come completely dressed down. I've seen the guy come in T-shirt with shorts, and they're not able to articulate. The bankers are very conservative.
They're not able to articulate. So it's
That's
not
the
just
thing.
about
They're
technology.
very tech lingo,
Okay.
but not able to bring it down to the level of understanding.
Right. So what
I
does
think
it mean
what
for the
Afaq
bank?
mentioned earlier and what made a difference to us, we actually packed some of the board that we have with tech-savvy board directors.
Who can relate to that ecosystem?
Absolutely.
that
So
they
we
go.
can at least speak to someone in the same,
Right.
board, and he can actually tell us, no, this is what it actually means.
So we've added a tech consultant to our board in
Okay.
Malaysia, right?
So Oliver, what are you doing? You are putting the entire banking system at risk, right? So as fintech startup,
Look,
what
so-
can you do better?
So a couple things. First off, I want to use an analogy. If you look at the telco industry, if you look at the cell phone industry, if you look at the computer industry, IBM, Dell, take a look at what their revenue generators were and who they were 10 to 20 years ago, and how much for them the impact of technology had to change, what their revenue generators and the profit buckets are. This is what banks will be facing right now, that how they're making money and where they're making money has to massively change. The whole mindset has to change. Shifting to the board member setup. It's not enough to have one digital expert, one digital team. It has to be an entire embrace of the culture that's coming in. And this is sometimes where the challenge comes in, where I have heard a lot of banks saying, I've got Ripple, look, I'm innovative. But how much are you utilizing it? How many of your transactions are running through Ripple? Then the second fallacy that comes in, we have an accelerator program. Great. That's great. How many of those accelerators have you made core of your technology? And where that conversation of risk comes in, and which is why innovative startups are faster than banks, banks are too paranoid about risk. The best risk policy is not approving, right? Zero risk.
Right.
But that comes at a cost. I just one point, and then we'll get to that. I take a look at one of these startups like Stripe and Square, Paytm. What they have said is, risk is there. I'm going to lose millions, but can I manage that risk and introduce more revenue about that? And that is the mindset that's holding the bank back today. It's, who cares that it's a 20-year-old fintech? That's your customer tomorrow, because that customer tomorrow is the unicorn tomorrow. Everybody's talking about Islamic innovation, and you know what? You want to catch that new bank, that new innovator, the guy in a T-shirt. Set an infrastructure for him where he can build a business through you, where he can get a corporate account, a corporate loan, a corporate advice. And you know what? Your innovation, I will expose it within my bank, and you've got a customer for life.
And let's talk through a live use case, right? So 60% of Australia's e-commerce today runs on Alpha Hub, right?
Well, not quite that much,
Okay.
but look, where
A significant part.
where the difference is.
What is the difference you're seeing in terms of the GCC banks that you're talking
Yeah,
to?
so-
What
so-
needs to change? Make your argument. What needs to change?
A fundamental understanding of this openness is okay as long as it's managed. First off, just to even talk about APIs, there's 3 different API components. First, there's the internal API, where you have to connect your bank to it. That's what your CTO should be focusing on. Nothing else. Let me build an API for my internal banking products. Then there's an open API that says, here, I've exposed my data, please help me build something. Still one element missing. That's the partner API. How will you expose and introduce these new innovators that are great at 1,000 of them that are great in one thing, not you trying to be great at 1,000 things. How will you expose these 1,000 innovators so that that's for the personalization there? So your mindset of minimizing risk, accepting digital strategy, introducing new revenue generators, then focuses on using this new vendor suite and using the API to generate revenue. And
Which
this
is
is what
great,
the banks
but
are.
how, again, are we talking the common language, banks and fintechs, right, in terms of how we are positioned, how we are structured, how we talk to each other? I guess the argument is, just because I've got a phenomenal technology at hand, it does not make me worthy of partnering with a bank. You deal with, Khalid, a lot of fintechs at your fintech bureau, right? What are you doing to prepare those fintechs to be able to speak to banks or partner up with banks?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with both. And I think if you look at both sides, if I look at the banks, now, they could be willing to adopt this technology, but their core infrastructure is absolutely legacy. So, you could have all the appetite for it, but as long as your rails are from, the Stone Age, then you can't really do much. And I think what happens is twofold. Banks, in a lot of cases, want to innovate, want to change. They're either doing it on the front end, so you've got a nice shiny facade. I always say it's like a Bugatti Veyron, but you open the hood and it's a diesel engine from the 80s. The back middleware is where a lot of the changes need to happen to enable you. So I think one is trying to figure out what's going on. Two, the fintechs sometimes come in at the wrong time to these players. There is an appetite. They've got a good solution. They might sell it well. Other fintechs, I think they come up with, we've got the best thing since sliced bread. This is the technology that you need. And I think it's sometimes lacking in terms of understanding what do the banks really need. And I think it's trying to find that balance. We try to see both. Obviously, overhauling your infrastructure takes a lot of time and a lot of investment, but we try to bridge at least the gap between the two. And I think what needs to change is you got to start somewhere. You got to start experimenting. The guy and the 20-year-old with the jeans and the T-shirt might have a phenomenal idea. You should try it at a small scale. You got to ring fence it.
Do you have examples of banks in Bahrain doing that?
So look, we've got a few examples. So for example, Kuwait Finance House launched a digital-only platform because they thought, you know what? The customer behavior is completely different. Account openings to happen more seamless way, and let's offer more. GIB launched their own digital platform, and we've got Bank ABC, for example, launching a challenger-only bank.
And KFH did it with a fintech partner.
And did it with a fintech partner that is there. And I think that's one really good example. There is an appetite now. Banks are willing to talk to fintechs. And I can tell you this from years of conversations, from you're a little guy on the street, we don't want to talk to you,
is that mindset changing?
It is changing. But I think now it's the soul searching. How do I fit in this new food chain? Right. Where do I stand?
Very important. So Oliver, your league, the fintechs, are not able to, the argument is, are not able to connect the dots, the new dots, the old dots and the new dots that can come together to form a new business model. You can talk technology very well, but many a times how the regulator will feel, how the compliance guy will feel, how the business guy will feel, you're not able to talk that language. On hindsight, could you have done anything different to accelerate how Alpha has taken off?
I'm not sure. And the reason why I'm not sure is sometimes the market just isn't ready. Sometimes it just takes time for... Take a look at the example of QR code. QR code is around 10, 15 years. And if you ask the founder of the QR code, could you have done anything different? No, it took Alipay to transform the entire QR code conversation. So even the API conversation, I mean, would banks listen if they weren't under that much attack from these new incumbents who are attacking their revenue? So what's helping is that banks have accepted we are under attack and dying a death of 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah.
And hence, for the first time over the last 12 months, we have seen a completely different appetite to listen.
So that mindset is changing. As next steps, the takeaways, right? What is that one change you would love to see in your bank in terms of that helping build that collaborative ecosystem? Do you see CIMB Islamic having 25 partners in the next 18 months?
I think we already moved from that mindset problem. We are ready for embracing technology, but we are stuck with an existing team who wants to develop in-house. From that first, the AI platform to recently we launched what we call enhanced virtual assistant. Instead of going through your normal online app, this is actually a chat bot. So it will actually ask you your username, sir. It actually talks to you, and then you can then customize. You can look for your spending patterns. You can put your trackers, your savings tracker goals or your spending tracker goals. But it has taken us a long time to develop it because it's all in-house.
Right.
I think that is the problem. We should basically say, look, we need 20 solutions. We will look for the best provider and then have that open API to link it. That's where I think the change needs to happen.
So interesting. So a couple of last questions, but before I get there, let me open the floor up as well. The themes that we are discussing is we are, on one hand, we've been talking about growth stabilizing for the Islamic finance industry, but then on the other argument is an era of hyper growth is staring at us, right? Are we ready to actually capitalize on the next billion consumers? The answer you got from the forum here is perhaps we can do a lot more. A lot more, right? And for that, the mindset has to change. Would you agree? Do the audience agree? Is the Islamic finance industry ready for the next billion consumers? Yes. No. Okay. So that's a wake-up call. Any questions, comments from anyone? Yeah, please. Rushdi. And we'll take 2 questions. Please keep it short. We'll take 2 questions at a time and address.
Yeah, I'll just keep it very short and just as a comment as well. I believe in our discussion we are not very fair to Islamic finance industry. If you talk about Islamic finance and conventional finance banking, the difference is Sharia compliance, okay? Most of our discussion today talking about technology, and we are not ready. We said the Islamic finance industry is not ready. This is I don't think we talk about Islamic finance at all in our discussion today. So we might say the market which we operate in is not ready, regulators are not ready. But Islamic banking, Islamic finance people, they use the same technology, the same everything, except the operating model only is changing. So did we talk about Islamic banking today or Islamic finance? We are talking about the marketing is not ready. Not the Islamic banking is not ready. I read your feedback on that because we talk about the readiness from marketing more than Islamic banking point of view.
So that's a comment. We have another question over there.
And a question.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is actually very closely related to the previous question. So there's many consumer insights that show that millennials more than any other group are socially motivated when it comes to investment and where they're going to put their money. If you look at Islamic banking today, many Islamic banking conferences, people always lament about commodity murabaha and how the Islamic banking system is modeling the conventional banking system. In what ways will Islamic Fintech enable the banks, or in what ways are the banks looking and trying to focus to make the Islamic banking and Islamic finance industry actually different from conventional industry in a tangible way, more than what we see today, where if you look at conventional and Islamic, it's very difficult, I believe, for a normal consumer, especially a millennial, to look at the two and say, this is an objective social difference between Islamic finance and non-Islamic finance. So that's my question about how can, and related to the first question.
So I think very pertinent. Again, Islamic Fintech, is there such a thing as Islamic Fintech? Or did we today discuss fintech for Islamic finance market? Clearly, we discussed fintech for Islamic finance market. Any thoughts?
Certainly, you can use any technology to improve solutions for commodity murabaha, and that is also being discussed in various forums within the industry and within each individual institution. Just to give you an example, because you talked about commodity murabaha, for example. The reason commodity murabaha came into being was the small traders were complaining that the transaction cost is too high because I have small commodities, small sizes, right? So commodity Muraba was to consolidate that, and they do one large transaction and then give you the invoices over the month to back up the commodity Muraba transaction. With the help of technology, you can certainly go back to individual smaller transactions, right? So technology is a great enabler. You can use it for anything.
Right. So this is fintech for Islamic finance. The other is, can we use exponential technology to actually bring out the Islamic finance differentiation?
I think if you look at banking, banking came about because of three problems. One is asymmetric information problem. The users didn't know who needed money. The people who needed money didn't know who had the money. The savers and users, right? So banking solved that problem. Second was the agency problem. If I hand money to someone under Mudaraba risk sharing, there was a risk of mismanagement, not able to disclosure. So they said instead of doing that, we just lend money. So the customers, when they deposit money, they are lending money to the bank. So it's actually a loan transaction. Third was the what we call this payment settlement problem. Banks provided the settlement mechanism. Today, all three can be resolved by fintech. You can do the settlement through fintech. You can solve the problem of finding the users and need people who save and use money through fintech, like peer-to-peer lending model. And the third agency problem also can be solved through AI and other predictive models. So do we still need banks? Do we still need a banking model based on lending and borrowing? I believe no. If you stretch this technology, you can actually do risk sharing on a customized risk and reward profile and eventually move over. You don't need commodity murabaha if you can solve the agency problem. And then straight go into risk sharing. That is the day when you can move away from commodity murabaha. As long as you have conventional banking, the best way of doing Islamically structured banking is commodity murabaha because it brings the unit cost down. But if you want to move away from commodity murabaha, you have to change the banking system.
Thank you. Do we have any further any questions? Please.
You have talked about artificial intelligence. I just want to ask you what blockchain is playing a role in the Hyperledger. Is it currently used in any Islamic bank?
Certainly, we have put in place blockchain transaction, and we have done test transactions. The biggest benefit of blockchain is real-time settlement. So it eliminates settlement risk, and that is a great advantage in modern banking. Has it become the backbone or the primary? No, it's early days. But the infrastructure has been done, the testing has been done, the legal agreements are being tested. So significant work is going on in the Islamic industry to adopt blockchain as the backbone of the operating system.
Thank you so much. We are nearing the end of this session. Let me try to bring it all together. So we heard a number of very interesting themes. We heard, the next billion consumer opportunity is there. There is a good level of awareness that banks need to change their mindset. The banking model, we don't know if that is still relevant or not in future. Banking surely is. What you're saying is a lot more can be done for banks to be ready to actually adopt the fintech ecosystem. Let me pose one last question, 30 seconds to each one of you. So Oliver, of course, if you partner up with more banking institutions, you can grow a lot faster, and you can create a lot bigger impact on the economies and the communities you work in. What is that one thing that you're going to bring, a change that you're going to bring in your business model in the next 12 months to ensure faster collaboration with banks?
The ability for new young startups to work in a risk-free environment for banks so that the banks can test and try them. And if they fail, they can swap them out.
What is Alpha going to do in the next 12 months to accelerate your bank collaborations?
Localize to the bank's requirements to help manage to their risk. Introduce these young startups, provide them a platform that's frictionless, that provides access, so that the bank can test them and try them and has a plan B if it doesn't work out, and that these young entrepreneurs and startups, which they all are, the guys in the shorts, can then come to you, and the moment you adopt them, you will have a customer for life.
This is massive. What you are saying is, instead of 80% of the cost being spent on IT infrastructure, shift that 80% cost on playing the game, doing business, than spending on IT.
But don't just shift the cost, shift some of the revenue too.
True.
Khalid, what are you going to do to prepare these fintechs for better bank collaborations in the next 12 months? You've got about 25, 30 fintechs that you're managing.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of the groundwork is probably needs to be done at the traditional financial institutions, whether it's conventional or Sharia compliant. And I think the moment these institutions are very much aware about this new reality that they're facing, that will ease the conversations for a lot of these fintechs.
Okay.
And at the same
so
time,
what exactly are you going to do as Fintech Bay to help prepare these fintechs for better bank collaborations?
Partner with Alpha.
well, that's one of them. I think what we do is we're starting to develop more of an awareness of what do the banks need, where are they, what are they thinking, and that's going to take its due course. And when we deal with fintechs, we talk to them, say, listen, this is what you've got on offer. This is what institutions are currently thinking about. Here is the opportunity in this current market and maybe in the regional market. And this is potentially how you want to be looking at it. And when you get in front of it, we're not going to do the sell for you. But here are sound bites that might get you into the door. We'll get you into the door. And this is where the thinking is. And I think, this is an evolving thinking. Obviously, some fintechs are...
So you'll get them into the door. Yeah.
We'll definitely get them into the door. You still got to be working with the institutions while they transform themselves. And at the end of the day, the whole ethos that we're built on and we advocate is collaboration. Right. And it's not only collaboration between fintechs and traditional institutions, but it's amongst institutions that were once competitors. Right. And I think there's a joint responsibility to figure out this is the world that we're in right now. How can we take advantage of it and evolve and survive? And I think this is an ongoing...
So you will open the door for them to actually collaborate with...
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Rafi, on behalf of CIMB Islamic, what is your commitment over the next 12 months? How are you going to encourage this collaboration?
I think internally we are looking at a few technology providers, particularly for predictive. We have a lot of problems on anti-money laundering. We have problems on KYCs. So it is actually looking at more the governance side, because a lot of the expertise has been built on client-facing. The CX and the user experience is now all internally driven. But it's taking a long time. I think we should move to a model where we have an open platform, and then we reach out to the best startups in the market to
in the next
provide
12
solutions.
months, what do you see that happening at CIMB?
Unfortunately, I think we've already inherited the whole team, right? We need to somehow find a way to actually move to the open platform. I think that shift is already happening. We are seeing discussions being had with third-party solution providers, but I think it has to be accelerated. I think the time is ticking. The thing is, the guys who are young, who are impulsive, are also broke, right? They don't have enough money to save. They're spending. But soon they will reach a stage where they will have enough wealth. There will also be wealth migration to the millennials. That's when I think they will say, look, guys, you are a dinosaur.
So next 12 months, what I hear is you'll try to get rid of the legacy and you'll
issues.
Try to bring in a new culture.
That's right.
Afaq bhai, next 12 months, your commitment in terms of how you intend to help the industry move towards this next billion consumer opportunity.
I think sitting on the board, we're trying to redirect investment, and we're trying to give confidence to the management that the board is comfortable to take a more patient view, looking at a fundamental reset, refix, rejig of the solution, as opposed to saying, I need 12 months payback, break even, or else. At the other level, we are talking at the board level with the regulators that, listen, I have to change, but you have to help me change and work as fast as I'm working. Otherwise, non-traditional players are going to come and take away my business.
So,
right? So at the regulator level, stakeholder management level, we're trying to create awareness that please work with us.
Okay.
We are now willing to take a little bit out of the box thinking, but we are concerned. I mean, I hear what Oliver is saying, right? That banks don't want to lose money. Yes, because it's somebody else's money. It's not mine, right? Secondly, the regulator is going to give me, I have tier 1 capital, tier 2 capital, buffer capital, systemic risk capital. The regulator also has to put the thinking hat on and understand for this to work, they also have a very important role to play.
I'm really happy that in the last 45 minutes, the most encouraging thing that I've seen is that willingness to move forward, right? And
There's no choice.
Yeah,
There's
there
no
is no
choice.
choice. And I'll end with two small examples. One is we launched a Waqfi platform which is for retail corporate banking, and we launched it with a bank in Bahrain called KFH Bahrain, right? And the approach that bank took was absolutely astonishing. The CEO opened the bank to us like nothing, right? No privacy, no nothing. I mean, there was complete trust, right? He said, Asher, you're doing something very interesting. Your team, I trust them. You understand how banking, etc., is done. We want to bring in digital onboarding with all eKYC, etc., right? And he gave us full access. As a result, we were able to roll it out, the digital onboarding part, in 4 months for 5% of the cost of what the other bank did. Over a 12-month period, is spending 95% more, right? So Abdul Hakim did take a risk on us, a calculated risk, and it delivered astonishing ROI for them, right? I mean, so one is we are seeing success stories of that sort. The second is
you also have a proactive regulator.
And CBB. So we went to CBB, and CBB said we don't have full regulations yet, but you know what? We proved to them why this new system will be more safer than the older one, and they're like, fine, we will allow you to do this while we write the regulation, and the regulations can follow. Right? So there was a huge leap of trust, a leap of faith there, a calculated risk that actually enabled this success. And really, the last point is what we all know about what the infamous words of Nokia's CEO was. Right, that we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. So unless we are able to really move fast and really shake things up, this industry would lose out, and we all wanted to win.
I think I'll share just one last point, and to the point the gentleman mentioned, and another point we're looking at very seriously is sustainability, and I think that's a multi-trillion-dollar theme. That the next billion customers from Islamic finance, instead of just purely looking at it from the traditional OIC markets and others, they could come from anywhere. And I think that theme is undervalued, but it's now significantly growing in prominence. Yeah. And with technology, I think a lot could be done.
This can be accelerated.
So this is, I think, a very important point.
And GIFF had a huge theme on sustainability as well, which plantation and all that. So Islamic finance became suddenly a small part, and the real economy was really surrounding it.
Absolutely.
A lot of good themes to talk about. We are out of time. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give a big hand to our panelists. And for any questions, they are available here. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.